Regular meeting of the City of San Angelo Development Corporation to be held on June 28th, 2023 at 8:30 a.m. at the East Mezzanine of City Hall, 72 West College Avenue, San Angelo, Texas, for the purpose of considering the following agenda items. Number one, we'll call the meeting to order. It is 8:30, and please pray with me. Father God, we are grateful and thankful for the many blessings you bestow upon us. Thank you for this beautiful day. We pray for your guidance and in our hearts and our minds as we make decisions on this beautiful community that we both serve and love. And we ask this in your Son's holy name. Amen. Absolutely. 3, public comment. Issues or items that are not on the agenda may be raised by the public at this time. Citizens should speak from the podium, begin by stating their name, and limit remarks to less than 3 minutes. Board members may request that a discussed item be placed on a future agenda. The board takes public comment on all regular agenda items during the discussion of those items. Do we have any public comment? No? Okay. We'll move on to number 4, the consent agenda. A, consider approving the necessary corporation disbursement. B, consider approving the regular meeting minutes of May 24th, 2023. C, consider approving the May 2023 financials. D, consider approving a lease agreement by and between the City of San Angelo Development Corporation and Career GPS LLC, and authorizing the board president or their designee to execute all necessary documents. E, consider approving a lease agreement by and between the City of San Angelo Development Corporation and Watson Wood Law, PPLC, and authorizing the board president or their designee to execute all necessary documents. And F, consider approving the expenditure not to exceed $32,000 to Park Hill, Smith and Cooper, Inc., to revise the overall drainage plan for Phase 2 of the industrial park in order to relocate a proposed detention pond, freeing up additional developable, however you say that, land for future sale. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have first by Director Mantooth, second by Director Gomez. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to 5A, regular agenda, public hearing regarding the expenditure of up to $250,000 of sales and use tax funds as an economic development incentive to Technology Tower, LLC, in accordance with Texas Local Government Code, Section 505.159. Presentation by Bob Schneeman.
Good morning. Bob Schneeman with the Economic Development Project Manager. See if I can get these things going here. This is a public hearing on an item that the board approved at their last meeting. It's for Technology Towers, LLC, in the amount of $250,000. The company plans to invest $5.1 million in the old Sitel building on the South Loop. They currently employ 59 employees, and they intend to create up to 20 additional jobs, or 20 additional employees, sorry. We have proposed a capital investment grant of $200,000. That would be structured such that they would receive $100,000 when they close on the building, and another $100,000 when they complete their improvements. And the improvements portion of it we may phase into a couple of payments if they ask that we do it that way. Job creation incentives are $2,500 per full-time equivalent, and the total grant is not to exceed $250,000. This public hearing is required as part of the Economic Development Act for Type B corporation. So, entertain questions, or we can open it for public comment.
Any questions from the board?
Well,
Yes,
just
sir.
a real quick question, Bob. I heard you say, or we may phase that second 100,000 if they ask for it. Are you talking about phasing it prior to their completion, or?
Well, if they would submit invoices for work completed, then we would look at that and maybe do a quarterly reimbursement. But it'll be reimbursement, it will not be payment in advance.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Sorry?
Remind us of the purpose of the agenda item, public hearing.
Oh,
Public comment.
yeah, and I thought I did, but, yeah, we are required to hold a public hearing on all projects prior to expending funds.
Right, and this was approved at last meeting, so this is just public comment for, right. So do we have any public comment? No? Okay, so I think, is that it? We move on to the next one?
Close the public hearing.
Yeah, we'll close it, yeah. 8:36, we'll open and close it for public comment. All right, and then we'll move on to item B, I guess if this,
This is also a public hearing. This is for a project to study the non-potable fire suppression system at the
Yeah.
airport.
let me read this first before you.
I'm sorry.
Before you jump in, so we have it on record. So B will be public hearing in accordance with the Texas Local Government Code, Section 505.159, regarding a professional services agreement with Kimley Horn and Associates in an amount not to exceed $83,500, plus expenses to perform professional engineering and design services evaluation of non-potable fire suppression pump station at San Angelo Regional Airport. A project authorized under Chapter 505 of the Development Corporation Act for infrastructure improvements necessary for development at Mathis Field. Presentation by Bob Schneeman. All right, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. As I said, this is a public hearing again as required by the act prior to expenditure of funds. It's for a project for the study of the non-potable water system at the airport, including the pump station, the building, and the system itself, and also looking at future demand on that system in an amount of $82,500 plus expenses, and that will be to Kimley Horn Engineers. Project is required to study is to support the proposed hangar construction along the flight line, to evaluate existing pump station equipment and structure, evaluate the existing 1 million gallon underground storage tank for both condition and capacity, to evaluate the existing distribution system, and to make recommended system upgrades. This is not a design contract, it is simply an analytical contract or an analytical study to determine future needs and what upgrades may be required. Entertain questions, or we can open it for public comment.
All right, any questions from the board?
So the $82,500 pays the consultant fee,
Yes, sir.
and it says plus expenses. What would be the expenses that would be covered?
We've anticipated the expenses to be about $6,200, so when we budget, we'll budget for $90,000 total. I don't anticipate that they'll go that high, but if they'd have to make an additional trip down here or do an additional presentation or something like that beyond what they've already proposed, then we would reimburse them for that. But the expenses are on a reimbursable basis.
So it's expenses for the consultants to travel to and from San Angelo.
Correct. They are located in Lubbock.
Okay. Once we have received the results of their analysis, the next step would be to actually perform some of these system upgrades. Is it anticipated that the corporation would be funding some of these system upgrades as well, or would that be handled by the city?
We would hope that those upgrades, if any are required, I anticipate there will be some, that those would be undertaken by city funds rather than Development Corporation funds. We have not addressed that at this point because it's kind of an unknown. It would certainly be something, if we were to propose that the Development Corporation pay for any part of that, it's something that would have to come back to the board in the form of a new project.
So if the corporation were to prefer to not fund this engineering study, would that be funded by the city?
I'm sorry, ask that again.
If the corporation were to decide that they do not want to fund this engineering study for this system at the airport, would that then put that in a position where the city would have to fund this engineering study if they wanted to move forward with these upgrades?
It would, however, the board has already approved this.
Oh, we already have, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so public hearing, just to kind of put it out there.
And it was staff's position that if the development corporation were going to fund any part of it, the study made the most sense for us to finance as part of the overall master plan for the airport. We've tended to take on the responsibility of the planning elements of it. We do have a public-private partnership with Skyline to do the hangar project. But beyond that, we're not really looking at anything else at this time.
Yeah. And just to clarify, just since Dr. Jones brought it up, at a public hearing, the board has already approved whatever we're talking about, and this gives the public an opportunity to make any comments or feedback about the upcoming project. So, go ahead.
No, so, and I understand that I wasn't on this board when this agenda item was approved, but I think I follow along the same path as Clifton here in the sense of this suppression system is being looked at for existing facilities, is that correct? Or what facilities does this pump station currently feed?
It currently feeds, I wish I had a map, I'm sorry. But it currently serves a couple of the Customs and Border Patrol hangars. It will serve the new Skyline hangar. It currently serves the L3, forget what their current name is, but L3 hangar. And then there are fire hydrants up and down the system that are available for fire suppression.
So my understanding is these buildings are being leased and the revenue for that is going to the airport fund, Fund 220?
It could be airport funds, it could be water system funds, could be something that the city council might look at as a totally separate item.
Okay, so I think moving forward, it's a good question as far as where these funds should be paid for out of. So that's why I wanted to ask those questions for clarification. I'll be like I said, I wasn't here when this thing was voted on, but I'm not a believer of Coast DC funding things that the airport fund, I believe, should be supporting. So, thank you.
And you'll have plenty of, should we bring it back, there'll be plenty of time for discussion for that.
Okay. Well, any other questions from the board? If not, it is 8:44.
Would you open a public hearing?
Yeah, I was going to. Thank you. We're going to open it up to public comment. It is 8:44. So do we have any public comment? No? Then we will close it for public comment, 8:44, and we'll move on to the next item, item C. Consider a resolution authorizing an expenditure in an amount not to exceed $200,000 for land, buildings, equipment, facilities, and improvements required or suitable for the promotion of development and expansion of affordable housing, a project authorized pursuant to Section 505.153 of the Texas Local Government Code, and authorizing the board president or his designee to negotiate and execute any required documents, subject to city council approval. Presentation by Bob Simons.
Good morning.
Morning, Bob.
We're here this morning to ask the board to consider allowing us to use affordable housing funds to rehabilitate homes with new roofs, siding, and paint. Now, while new homes play an important part in neighborhood revitalization, it's just as important to rehabilitate those deteriorating homes and units in those areas. Over the past 10 years or so, the city's neighborhood blitz helped kind of address the exterior in those homes in our target neighborhoods. Unfortunately, we're no longer able to sustain that program. The funds, what we propose, that the funds would basically provide funding to rehabilitate homes in our target neighborhoods, the funds would be coming from fund balance versus a new allocation. With these funds, we propose to carry out rehabs across the 6 target neighborhoods, excuse me, and we're going to focus on the most deteriorated units. And at this time, I'd like to actually introduce Dr. Craig Myers. He's a long-term community partner in neighborhood revitalization. He would like to kind of address the board on the success of the city's efforts in the past and the role that COSA DC has played in that success. So Craig, you want to say a few words?
I'm Craig Myers, and the Neighborhood Revitalization Program, of which the affordable housing is a part, has been in operation really since about 2005, I believe, when the city determined that there were 4 blighted areas in our community, slums, if you want to call them that. And I was on the committee that the mayor assigned to discuss it, and like most committees, it discussed it, and nothing happened. But about that time, there was a new administration, a new city manager, and a neighborhood organization that came to town that began to collaborate on developing a program to do something that hasn't been done in any city in the state of Texas. And that's not to put programs or different things into slum areas, but to eliminate slums. And so a program was put together that hasn't been done anywhere else. That is, that instead of looking at one aspect, new homes, apartment complexes, infrastructure, rehabs, condemnation and demolition and all of those kinds of things, that you do them all at once as the opportunity allows itself. Because the reason most other urban renewal things fail is because you get an independent entity or the city or a state that will put a project into a slum, and if nothing else changes around it, in 10 years it's a part of the slum. And so a coalition, very informal but very committed to the same focus, was put together that included a COSA DC, and I was on the committee that after a really very sometimes vehement set of discussions allowed the inclusion of the affordable housing element in there to try to get the program passed in the bond issue that allowed all this to happen. And so we began to work. The city provided staff people like Bob and a number of other people who were key to put together infrastructure and environmental things that had been ignored since the beginning of these really segregated neighborhoods that after the end of segregation really were not serviced, like with the code compliance. West side of town, if there's a vacant lot with 8-inch weeds in it, code compliance hears and the weeds are gone. There's mesquite and cactus and old car bodies and feral animals in hundreds of open areas that make it impossible to try to really improve anything. So code compliance came on board and did an exceptional job, and there were hundreds of areas that were ready for redevelopment. There were, several years developing all the ramifications of the program that's now in existence for the gap financing and the other things that you guys do. And over the period up until now, you've invested about $6 million in this, and it has been well spent. It has helped any number of families get started in homes who are financially responsible but don't have the tax credit or the income to get a loan all by themselves and get a down payment. And so this was really good. We incorporated all the not-for-profits that were doing anything that had to do with neighborhood revitalization, such as Habitat, Galilee Development Corporation. And so we began to do rehabs and new houses. And one of the interesting things is that we also mobilized the neighbors, and when you put a rehabbed house in a block, within a year, there'd be one that the neighbors did themselves, and you began to develop a situation where the whole neighborhood began to change. The city blitz came on, and about 40 houses a year in a very concentrated area where you would see a greater impact on the community. And then rebuilding together had about 40 houses a year. And you do all those kinds of things with some new houses. You had the block grant money that was supposed to go into poverty-stricken areas, but was generally used to balance the budget in other areas that are supposed to be fixed, like streets and water and whatnot. And you began to put in about 25 partners in all of this, each of them doing exactly what they were doing. If you were a rehab group, then you rehabbed, but you did it in an area in conjunction with what everybody else was doing. Bob has been involved with it from almost the very beginning and has been absolutely key in doing things that help. But fast forward, and by the year 2013, statistically, there were no slums, because the 70% of substandard housing in all of these areas went down to 30%, and the environment was, conducive to continuing. It was a developing neighborhood. By 2018, according to a case study that was done in 1921, but using 2018, the latest statistics, the 70% had gone down to less than 20% of substandard houses. And the private sector was coming in building at a very, very rapid rate. And now over 100 millions of taxable property has been put on the ground. And they say, well, how you verify that? Well, you verify it because we know where it went. For instance, when we began to show development, developers began to be interested in the area. And if you could help them get tax credits, they would come in and develop their own projects. And 3 apartment complexes were built, and 1 was rehabbed, and a 36 family of 36 buildings for low, moderate income families, all were done with tax credits over $45 million right there. And when you look at what you have done, what the block grant money has done, what the volunteers has done, the W2S, the community organization, gave over $10,000 hours of volunteer labor, and we're advocates down at the state and here for all these different kinds of things. And so there's been a great amount of success. There are still some things that need to be done, and what Bob was presenting is probably going to be one of several suggestions you get in the future that allow you to look at the way you are spending your $350,000 a year to get the maximum multipliers and the maximum impact. Right now, the blitz is stopped not just because of COVID and things, but there's no longer the need to a concentrated area where you have 30 or 40 substandard houses in a 10 or 20 block area. They don't exist. So you have to start picking them out of different areas to use the whole area, because now there's probably 10 to 12% of all of the houses that are substandard in these areas. And you need to get them. If you don't, you wind up stabilizing the neighborhood, but as people move out and other people you want to move in, and so you drive through a neighborhood and you drive on a block and there are 9 beautiful houses and there's one really eyesore, you're not going to buy in that area, and things begin to decline. So you need to pick out those areas to support the continuing development and make sure that these areas are secure. Also, there are neighborhoods that aren't blighted, but they are elderly, occupied by most of the residents, and they are older neighborhoods, and you're beginning to show wear and tear, and they are needing the same kind of attention so that they don't become blighted areas along the way. So this is an important kind of thing, and $350,000 is not a large amount in terms of your overall budget that you administer, but it's a part of multipliers that have made an impact on the community that is absolutely incredible. And people say, well, if there's $100 million, how come we haven't heard about it? Well, the reason is that nobody can take credit for it. There are 25 partners that have been engaged in this, and it sort of comes under the radar when you look at all of it. And the important part of COSA DC is that COSA DC and the block grant money is the only guaranteed money that we get. For most projects, we have to go find support, we have to go find other entities, we have to find volunteers, we have to do all these different kinds of things. But you can start from scratch when you say, we need to start doing this in this area or that in that area with what you have and what the block grant money provides. And so what Bob is suggesting is needed now more than the Blitz was needed 10 years ago, but it will only be the beginning of changes that will allow the city to continue to become what actually we've had 3 or 4 groups that have come in here from the state, from different organizations that are looking at investing in health care or other kinds of things. And everyone we've talked to has said that they've never seen a city this size without a blighted area. There's a block you can go down and you'll see 3 or 4 houses that, you know, are really substandard. But you can go down and you'll find 3 or 4 blocks and there are no substandard houses. There are no neighborhoods, there are no blighted areas. And that is something that just doesn't exist in other communities because there's never been this kind of collaboration. And you're greatly appreciated, and you are essential to the continuation of what's happening. And we hope you not only approve what Bob was suggesting, but that you also are open to listening for new ways to continue this to its completion. So I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Myers. Any questions, comments from the board?
I've got a few probably for Bob.
Rob.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Craig, appreciate it.
And this is coming from pure ignorance, just trying to understand. I was a part of this project when I worked for the city. It's an amazing project. It did great things in the community. What I want is clarification on how do you select the homes that it says siding and roofing. How do you select those homes? What are your parameters for selecting those homes?
Sure. The process we've used in the past, we do windshield surveys. We have our staff basically selects an area that we want to basically attack. We want to blitz. And then we would basically go door to door and hand out information and for those homes that we thought would benefit from it. And then at that point, it's first come, first serve if they come to us. And the funny thing is, when we first started, city employees going up and handing things over, they just did not want to respond. But as soon as we started doing a house here and a house there, then they started coming in. And so that we've kind of broken that barrier. So we do get a lot of participation from the community now. I think what we'll do, I will continue our windshield surveys. I will continue that process. We will basically knock on their door and ask them if they're interested.
Steve may be getting ready to ask this question, but who determines which homeowner can afford to do their own repairs and which homeowner needs assistance with making those home repairs?
Well, what happens, once we approach them and see if they're interested, there is an application, of course, and the application comes to us. We vet them for income. We check to see if they have in fact have enough money to do what they do, what they can do, and then we go from there. They have to be income eligible. Based on our criteria we use for the same CDBG grant that we get through HUD, we use that criteria for COSA DC funds as well, which is 80% of AMI, by the way.
Okay. So, thank you, Rick. So with that, I guess a follow-up question would be, I want to make sure we're staying, and I assume, Brandon, that you vet this out, but there's a difference between affordable housing and low-income housing. And so the question is, are these individuals low income? Are they considered low income? Or is this promotion and development for affordable housing?
But it fits the criteria for affordable housing. Rehabilitation is affordable housing. Now, that's in fact, our CDBG program has categorized our rehabs as affordable housing. So yeah, the answer is yes, it would be affordable housing. And now you have to be low to moderate income to qualify, but it's all tied to the affordable housing description of what the program is.
Okay, 'cause, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add, so in the act that allows for affordable housing, it refers to a federal statute, and there's two scenarios under that. One is rental housing, and the other one is home ownership. And under each of those, it lists the qualifications of which low income is included. And so, yeah, I think that's how Bob will have to vet these, is to ensure that they meet that federal qualification.
So are we dispersing funds for affordable housing projects or for low-income?
Affordable housing, they happen to be low income. It's all tied to affordable housing, because at the end of the day, a neighborhood that's not blighted brings in economic development, helps bring in economic development. So that's how we approach this program overall, as an umbrella approach.
And the other part of the act is, I mean, it says, so land, buildings, equipment, facilities, and improvements that are suitable for the promotion, development, and expansion of affordable housing. So I don't know, there's no cases that interpret this statute, so I can't say for sure what improvements means and expansions mean, but if it qualifies under the federal statute as an affordable house, then I think being able to improve that house would qualify. But again, I mean, a court may decide something different.
That's what we've taken over the last 15 years or so. That's the approach we've taken. And it's held up pretty good, legally anyway.
And I'm not knocking the project. Like I said, I've been a part of it. It's an amazing project. I just want clarification and make sure we're following what we should be following. And again, there's no case study to base our decision on. To me, my interpretation of improvement is to improve for future building, for future expansion, development, not existing. I guess that's the way I'm taking it. That's my personal opinion. So I just want to make sure we're following what we should be following when we disperse funds or distribute
Well,
funds.
you can also look at it as future investment in that neighborhood. As you, like as Dr. Craig Myers mentioned, as you go in and you renovate existing homes, there's a better chance of having new homes come in and have the local developers come into the area. A good example is Lakeview. Lakeview's really taken off with private developers. Now that we started, and we kind of put the seed in there using some of your funds, and now it's taken off, and it's actually pretty huge, actually. So that's the idea, and we want to continue doing that, because if we don't, if we ignore our existing homes, there'll be a long-term problem, because you won't have people coming in for future development.
And, sorry, final question. Appreciate all your responses. So the CDBG grant is no longer available?
No, it's still available, but what we did, we have to start looking at inside fixes. We kind of earmarked to kind of support the neighborhood blitz, to make sure that we're at least doing the exterior to kind of, again, visual impact. We've done that. So now we've got to start looking at the inside. We have clients coming to us asking for assistance with interior repairs that we can't touch, windows and, walls and drywall and that kind of thing. We don't do that, because we earmark those funds, and we kind of have to go back to that now. Our public comments, public meetings people have brought that up, and they need help inside as well. So we need to kind of shift back to where we were with CDBG back 10 years ago, before the blitz.
I have a few questions, Bob. So these are all owner-occupied homes? We're not spending
These are
money?
owner-occupied, yeah. Now,
Okay,
with the
so they're
blitz,
not
we did
rental
actually
use.
do rentals as well. We made the landlord sign a commitment that they would rent to low-income individuals for 5 years. There's a form that they fill, but there's a very few of those that we've done. We don't have to do that. We can just go strictly homeownership, and that's why we start off. We start with homeowners.
I would see. And so how do you identify the contractors who are actually going to perform this work?
Okay.
How do you make sure that they're not charging us taxpayers a premium rate to accomplish these siding repairs or roofing repairs?
We have a set of developers that work with us. They've been vetted they have the insurance, they all work off of our specs. We have a construction manager who goes out to the site, sees the house, draws up the work specs, and that's what and then we put it out for bid. And then that bid comes back, and then we decide that the lowest bidder, the most qualified lowest bidder. We've had some bidders come in that are not qualified, we've not gone with them, but that's how that works. To
Okay, so
ensure
the
we-
last question, you mentioned this is coming out of fund balance. Fund balance from the funds that you received from Cosa DC?
Yes, sir. This is basically funds that we've kind of recaptured through sale of homes and some other things. They've kind of come in, they're not part of that 335. So it won't affect, it shouldn't affect the number of new homes we build going forward.
It should not.
It should not. It's going to be the same number. I think we're shooting for 5 again next year. We should have enough funding for that. This is money that we accumulated from, like I said, sales of homes and recapture of funds.
Last question, how many units are going to be rehabilitated?
We're going to
for
try to
this
shoot for
amount?
25. 25. That's kind of it could be less, it could be more, depending on how much work is required, how much the cost, of course, contractors, you were saying. Cost of construction, unfortunately, does go up, and we got to play with that and manage that expectation, I think. So,
Has the corporation funded this sort of rehabilitation of existing properties in the past, or is this a new departure?
we have done this before. In fact, Coastal DC funds, they did, we earmarked a new allocation of over $600,000 during the storm Bradford area. So we used Coastal DC funds to go in there, rehabilitate and build and kind of help that neighborhood. So that's not the first time. And we also provided, Coastal DC provided, that's where we had a lot of fund balance. Before I took over, we had millions of dollars to go in there and do some things. So we kind of attacked quickly, and we'd build new homes. We built some spec homes. We did roofs. We did a roof project through Coastal DC funds. So this is not the first time. It's kind of like but we would like to continue as we go, and we'll talk about that in the strategic planning. We have come up with a strategy for future use of these funds. Maybe we could come up with we're going to propose to come up with something different. We'll keep new homes perhaps, but then change it and do some other things. Something like this perhaps. So we kind of keep focusing on existing homes, because that's important, just as important as new homes, I think.
Thank you.
So a follow-up are the contractors predominantly local? I know when you go out for bid, take the lowest bid unless there's a variance of 5%, then you can stay local, I believe is the bid process. I like Dr. Jones's question. I just want to make sure our tax dollars are staying local as well if we can.
They're all local.
Okay,
They're all local,
thank you.
every one of them.
All right,
Yes, we're asking for approval.
all right.
Max, we've talked about field trips, and we've already had one. This would be a good topic for a future field trip to ride through some of these areas where this work has been done, going back that far, and having these two gentlemen help us understand the history on some of those properties and where they were and where they are now. And so that's something for us to keep in mind later today when we talk about field trips.
Okay, yeah, good idea.
Sure. Thank you.
Yes, sir? That's Mars.
A couple of things that come up here. One of them is that if you're trying to upgrade neighborhoods, you can't do it just with new homes, because if they're sitting next to a shabby home, nobody's going to build there. But the second thing is that the value to human beings is kind of important here. And one of the other things that occurs when so-called successful urban renewal occurs is gentrification. One is you buy up the area and you improve it, and then the local residents can't pay for it, and they have to move out and search for housing somewhere else, which is probably higher than where they are. And the second one is that you demolish it and then just displace everybody by developers. But one of the things about this, because of the rehab part of it, is there was nobody out of 5,000 homes, which we surveyed house to house, the WTOS folks, there was nobody that was displaced by this. And the value of the homes, the median value, and this is just a 10-year period, but the median value of a home when we started in the Blackshear area was $28,000, and they probably had back taxes and could not afford to sell it anyway, and the kids would let it go back to the city. By 2018, the value had come up to almost $90,000 as the median value. Since that time, the increase, because of the injection of new home development by contractors, by the private sector, the median home is worth more than $110,000. And when you look at that, you're taking a person, generally an older person or a poor person, who had no equity, no real worth, has increased by 300% their individual worth. And the studies that have been done says the highest reason for generational poverty in bad neighborhoods is that you don't have anything to pass down to your kids, and the most important thing in our country is a house. And so now you've got people who have access to money, not only of equity that they can use, but also something to leave to their kids that sends them to college or somewhere else. So the rehabs are absolutely critical in this. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Well, any other questions from the board? Do we have a motion? Public comment first? Okay, we'll open it up to public comment. It is 9:12. Do we have any public comment on this agenda item? Seeing none, we will close it for public comment. 9:12, we'll entertain a motion.
Can I ask one final, just for clarification? This is not seeking additional funding from Co-CDC. This is strictly just utilizing funds that were already allocated that are in the fund balance.
That's correct. It's not in the fund balance in an accounting sense, but his unused monies from prior years, we roll forward. Steve, you're familiar with how that works? And I think Tina said he had in excess of 500,000 available in the current budget. Little less than 500 available in the current budget, which obviously is more than an annual allocation. That's because those unused monies from prior years were made available this year to be used for projects. So that's what he's asking for. That's what's proposed, and that's what you would be approving.
Yeah, it's the same
Or
pot of money,
denying.
same pot of money we've had. Like I said, we're still going to do 5 new homes this year. We're still scheduled to do that. So whatever, between the 5 homes and whatever's left, we'll be able to use those funds. And I think it's close to 200,000. This project, we will not exceed 200,000. Could be less, but that's kind of our goal.
Something else to think about is we also later today will be talking about the policy and strategy that goes with affordable housing. And this is one possible outcome where instead of building a completely new house, we focus on rehabs and updates. And this could be the
Or
mechanism.
a combination of both. We get stricter on underwriting our clients, because we do have some that do have some issues. Reduce that of new home construction and add another component of affordable rehabs to kind of go hand in hand to kind of attack this problem as we go forward. And that certainly is a possibility.
Just one final question. So once we rehab these properties and their value increases, that would lead to an increase in their assessed value by the taxing authorities. So are we finding individuals who did not have the resources to maintain their home? Once we've maintained it for them, do we find them being forced out of their home because of the higher tax burden associated with that?
We actually have a program through the tax appraisal district. They reduce and cap the cost if they fit into our programs. We've been doing that for a while now, so.
So they don't get,
They don't
their
get-
property's not assessed at the full value
Yeah,
of a...
yes, exactly. It gets capped in the assessment, and it still makes them affordable. We haven't had anybody where taxes have been a problem to date.
So if that home were to be sold to someone else, do they start over from scratch, or
They would start over again, yes. If it's somebody else, yeah, that's correct. Because we're vetting the homeowner, so that's what we vetted. That's when the neighborhood gets benefit, but the individual gets benefit from this program. And if they leave, once we have an agreement with them, and once they leave, it starts over again. Then it's back to the market.
So with that being said, that it's not seeking new funding and you already have the existing funding, I'm in support of trying it out and seeing how this works. So I'll make a motion to approve.
Appreciate it.
I'll second it. By the way, Dr. Jones, that may be your 7th or 8th final question. I haven't really hit your score.
Well, they just keep bubbling up.
Is that the final? All right, so we got
There's a second, so.
yeah, we got a motion, Director Mahaffey, a second by Director Mantooth. Any other discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Great discussion. Thank you, Bob, for all you do. We'll move on to the next item. Item D, update regarding the Economic Development Director position and search process, presentation by Michael Dane.
Good morning, Michael Dane, Interim Economic Development Director. Update on the search process for a new permanent occupant of this position. We interviewed 2 candidates, was that last week or week before? Week before. Both good interviews, both good candidates. The strategy was for Daniel to follow up with them and have some additional conversation with them after the interviews. That has occurred, and the panel is meeting this afternoon to have some discussion about that. The interview panel this afternoon at 2. So Max will be there, and I hope, and we'll discuss it further at that point. Very hopeful. We had 2 good candidates. Both, I believe, could do the job.
Any questions, feedback? All right, thank you, Michael. Move on to item E, consider approving the 2023-2024 Development Corporation budget and authorizing staff to present said budget to the San Angelo City Council for formal adoption. Presentation by Tina Diersky.
Good morning, Board.
Morning.
How does this one work? The big button? There we go. Okay, we're going to go over your budget for fiscal year 2024 as proposed by staff. You'll see here on the economic development side, revenue is up. We are budgeting that and proposing the budget at current year, flat projections, less 5%. That's what City Council has been doing for the last several years in an effort to be conservative, since sales tax can be a volatile, funding source. The other line includes rent and interest income, and the increase there is all due to the interest income increase. Moving on to your expense budget for economic development. Personnel is down there a little over $100,000. That's because we're not budgeting for the administrator position. We do have the director position in the budget currently. Operations and maintenance is up slightly at $19,000. That is because of $7,700 related to the marketing agreement, and a little bit in building maintenance that has to do with HVAC and janitorial service. We're seeing a little bit of an increase in those. Another thing to keep in mind for the board, the HVAC unit, I'm told, is getting close to end of life, and so we may be looking at a replacement for that next year, but if that's the case, it's probably going to be a large enough project to bring back to the board for approval, so we're not budgeting for it at this time. Partner affiliations, that includes Chamber, Ports of Plains, I-14, and TMCN, and that is down $5,000. We had a little money in there set aside for anticipated or potential sponsorships, I guess, is what we're calling them. We decreased that a little bit, so down $5,000 there. Indirect cost is down $20,000, and that's largely due to less activity and therefore less work being put on the finance and legal departments. And then future projects, of course, is what you would have then left available for projects next year. And look at that number, it's over 2.1 million this next year, so that's good improvement, up $500,000.
Why don't you ask them if they have questions?
Sure. You have any questions?
I've got one question on the indirect cost line. So how exactly, I know there used to be an indirect cost study done. Are we following that study to determine that dollar amount of that
Yes.
200,000?
That is where that comes from. We still do that study annually.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. One thing I did want to mention here while we're on the expenditure budget is we had a board member in the last meeting ask about business plan competition and whether we might want to increase the award monies with that. So that's something that may change if the board wants to entertain a conversation about that as well.
It's in here at the current amount, right?
Right. Mhm.
But that can be amended or altered at a future time, or you can propose to amend that now. But Ruben was the one talking about it, and he couldn't be here today. He had a dental appointment.
So
Any-
which line is, are those funds for the business plan competition?
They're in
Affiliation?
O&M right now. Something else I should have mentioned with sales tax as well. Sales tax and personnel, as we always tell you, will be updated in accordance with council direction for staff, any staff raises, and then, of course, whatever we budget for sales tax on the city side, we budget for the development corporation to be consistent.
Okay. Any other questions from the board? Okay.
Good. So moving on to the ballot side, same thing for sales tax, projecting flat for the current year, less 5%. And other on this one is entirely interest income. And then the ballot expenditure budget, $335,000 for affordable housing, as we just talked about. That remains flat every year in accordance with the ballot language. Water includes the Fort Stockton water rights agreement, which is $498,000 of that amount. The other $200,000 is what we set aside in case we have any reimbursements related to the West Texas Water Partnership. Debt is up just slightly in accordance with our debt schedules. About $2.9 million of that debt line is related to long-term water supply and support of those debt service payments. The remainder is the debt service on the 2011 debt issue that was related to ballot projects. Indirect costs, again, just down slightly. Same thing, mostly due to less activity for the finance department. And future projects, a little larger here because it does get a bigger bulk of the at the 72%. So at almost $1.9 million next year for future projects with the current projections.
And again, those funds have to be, per the ballot, allocated towards water projects or affordable housing.
Yeah, we've had a lot of discussion with Brandon and City Attorney's Office recently about this. And yes, any future projects, I guess what we determined in the end was that it needed to be related to long-term water supply per the ballot language. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, and this is something we'll go over in the workshop, the actual language, but the water projects are authorized based on a percentage, and so like the minimum is 21% going up to the 72%, so that can fluctuate depending on those other projects or as they get completed, and then if we did have another election that approved other specific projects, they could fluctuate then.
Okay, and that language is in place until, is it 2030 or 2040? I can't remember.
No, it
Oh,
doesn't
it
expire now,
Okay,
yeah.
unless we have
A
something
new
else.
election,
Okay.
yeah.
The only thing that has a sunset is the affordable housing program. That may be what you're thinking of.
That's what I was thinking
And
about.
that is 2040.
Okay. Okay.
So, quick question. What is the ending fund balance projection on this ballot side?
I don't have that with me right now. I can tell you, we will go over current financial position in the workshop in a little bit. Right now, the unassigned fund balance in the economic development side is about $5.1 million. In the water side,
Just rough. Just curious.
I have it right here somewhere.
The follow-up question, the reason I'm asking is, again, I'm not taking away from the affordable housing. It seems like there's a fund balance that has accumulated because of the amount we're putting in that line item. Should there be a discussion of reducing that? But at the same time, if there's a significant fund balance that needs to be spent, it makes sense leaving it alone.
You're absolutely right. And we are prepared to talk about projects and needs in our in the next meeting. And a discussion of what those fund balances are and what possibilities exist for their utilization. And we do have some ideas related to the ballot side, which we think would, the board would view positively. But
So staff's opinion is beneficial to leave as is, flat. You have some other ideas.
Affordable housing is directed by the ballot, so it has to be that amount every year until
Okay.
it sunsets.
Thank you.
And any amount that is left at year end, that's why we carry it over, because it is in the ballot.
Gotcha.
So the 1.9 million there for future projects does not include any of that fund balance?
That's correct. So if we didn't use it next year, that would then fall to fund balance, so. And
Bob has a big, long list with big numbers on
Yeah.
it, and
it's going to be eaten up very quickly.
I can take care of any of it, don't worry about it.
The unassigned fund balance on the ballot side is 5.8 million, to answer your question. But we'll go over that again, like I said, in the workshop, so.
Hey, Mike, you got to clarify which Bob you're talking about.
that Bob is modest. His numbers are modest compared to this Bob.
All right. So we got Mike, and we got Bob and Bob, right? That's this.
You're right, we are extraordinarily blessed.
Yeah. All right, cool.
So
Any-
that's your proposed budget. Like I said, only changes that we anticipate right now would be sales tax to correlate with city as well as personnel. And then the business plan competition, I don't know if we came to a consensus on that, if we want to bring that back to the next meeting, or we can always adjust the budget as necessary if we
Yeah,
want to
I
make
think we
changes.
could put that as follow-up for the next meeting.
We can do it however you want. If you guys are all tuned up on it today and say, put some extra money in there, or if you'd like to hear the discussion, we can handle it either way you want to go.
What, do you want to share what Ruben was proposing?
He was proposing a total of $100,000 split between the first, second, and third place. Currently, it's at $70,000, so it's $40,000, $20,000, $10,000. And Nora, do you have that email where he said how he would recommend splitting it out? I think he said 60,000. I don't want to lie. Let her pull it up real quick. It's currently
40,
a
20,
total
10.
of 70,
40, 20, and 10.
split 40, 20, and 10.
He would recommend 60 first, 60, 25, and 15, or 60, 30, and 10. Ultimately, he would like to see an overall increase of 100,000, so.
If you wanted to include that in what Tina is. Sorry. If you wanted to include that in what Tina will take to council, just include it in your motion. Something along the lines of move to approve with the exception that we increase the allocation for.
And we can even increase it to the 100,000, and you guys could discuss later how it gets split out between the first, second, and third prizes.
So now currently it's 70, but then there's admin on top of that is almost 10, right?
10,
So it's
yes.
80.
That helps
Yes.
pay for the expenses of marketing.
Right.
And the.
So if we wanted to
plaques.
increase it to 100, we really in reality be increasing it to
110,
110.
correct.
To allocate for those additional.
Correct.
Delta's 30.
Yes.
So, and we could discuss it. I mean, we could, in my opinion, we could say yes and not use it, have it in there built in. And if we want to have further discussion about it, we can. Or we could just, not do it and revisit it later. I'm good either way. I don't know how the board feels about it.
Well, Desiree, do you have something you want to say?
Yes, I'm sorry. I would just like to address, just Hello, Desiree Johnson with the Small Business Development Center. Just for a point of clarification, because we are incredibly excited that y'all are discussing this, but from an current standpoint, it would be for the next year. So y'all are planning, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we've already launched the competition for this year. The guidelines for the 2023 competition are in place, and those applications are open. So this would affect the competition for June timeframe of 2024. So just putting that out there. Thank you.
I would agree with your comment and respecting Dr. Spice's comment. I mean, I'm okay putting it in, and then if we don't utilize it, we don't, but at least it's there.
Yeah.
We've got access to it.
I mean, I'd love more insight from Nora, from Desiree as well, just as far as obviously, we're not really prepared to discuss this today and so forth, but, I'd appreciate a little bit more insight as the benefits, pros and cons of what you think, if it will stimulate more either interest on the front end, applicants and so forth, or give the winning participants, more, opportunity to do even greater things. So, I mean, I think it's positive, on the surface, but I'd love insight from the experts that are managing it on a regular basis to kind of get your perspective on it before we really make a decision.
So the alternative is to request a budget adjustment or a budget amendment.
Of course,
To move
yeah.
that later.
Yeah, we can always do it internally during the next fiscal year, out of future projects.
If you make the motion to include an increase now and later on decide on some other number, you've just, other than, it doesn't matter, whatever, if you decide to increase it in a future discussion, you've just completed this step at this point.
Yeah. There's always room for adjustments, so.
I would vote yes to increase that, but I want to also remind us that there are other prize considerations that are added to that in-kind prizes. And for someone who provides some of those in-kind prizes, that has real value. So it's not just the $70,000 that they are getting. They're getting additional stuff as well. So just remind us of that.
Maybe
And,
as
having
part of
said
that discussion, we could talk about how much publicity we give to those prizes.
Well, we're certainly not looking for publicity. I just wanted to remind us that those are additional prizes that are added to the cash that they get. And having said that, I would make a motion that we approve the increase in the current budget.
Second.
So you're proposing to approve the proposed budget with that change, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay.
Tina, could you move back a slide or two?
Sure.
To economic development side. Let's see, personnel.
Revenue or expense?
356. And indirect costs, 199, so 555. And how much interest income did we earn? Are we expecting to earn? 186. And on the ballot side?
No.
Oh, sorry, I went too far.
217. And what was the indirect cost on the ballot side? 36. So early on in those formative years, it was a badge of honor because we didn't have any administrative expense, that the interest income exceeded the administrative expense for the corporation. Well, we've had a little drop in administrative expense, and the interest market is back a little bit. So that ratio has been difficult in the last 20 years. But it's taken a little turn for the better this year with interest rates up, with an expectation that we'll earn $400,000, and between personnel and indirect costs, an expected expenditure there of $600,000. So we've got a net administrative burden of $200,000. It's anytime we can do any kind of program and minimize the administrative piece of what it takes to run a program, it's a good thing. And with that number, between rates up and costs down, took a turn for the better this year. So, better year. We're still not earning more interest than we're paying in salaries and administrative costs, but it moved in the right direction this year.
So that projected interest income is income off fund balances and then whatever money's
Yes.
current account?
We invest in accordance with the Public Funds Investment Act. We have an investment oversight committee that meets quarterly, and we invest the Development Corporation's funds according to the policy that you adopt annually.
So does that interest income assume that future project's money will be spent in its entirety? Or does it assume we're not going to spend any of that future project's money? Is it just on fund balance?
It's on unspent monies, both
It's on-
committed and uncommitted.
So there implicit
We have
there's
money
some
market-
sort of an assumption about how much of that future project's money is actually going to be expended during that fiscal year, correct?
It's at the point in time, so whatever cash is, or, in the money market or in the investments, it's invested in accordance with that.
No, I understand that. I'm
The
just
future
saying-
projects would be assumed as if it's cash in the bank that's being invested currently.
Right, so they're assuming that cash in the bank is going to sit there the full fiscal year at whatever the current interest rate they're able to earn on those investments?
For the projections?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, so if
And
we
we're
actually-
very conservative with these projections. In fact, we expect them to exceed, but we're always conservative and know that if you go over your interest income budget, that you'll still have it available to spend if you need it.
Right, but if we were to spend, let's say we spent up all the future projects money 1 year into the fiscal year, then that projected interest income
We would
is
adjust
not
it.
going to meet expectations.
We'd adjust accordingly if that were to happen. Yes, sir.
It's a great question.
Yes,
The
it
bigger amount that is subject to being spent, we have about $5 million in commitments that are out there. This will be part of slides in the next meeting. About $5 million in current commitments associated with contracts that is subject to being spent also. Now, those are a little more predictable because you have to meet milestones in order to be eligible for your money.
And we do cash flow statements with those projects and work with our investment advisors to make sure that we have the cash available as we need it.
All right, so just to get us back on track, I think we have a motion on the table, if I'm not mistaken. We haven't voted on.
Do we need public comment on?
Okay, so we'll open it up to public comment. 9:38. Do we have any public comment on this agenda item? If not, we will close it for public comment. It's 9:38. We have a motion on the table. A reminder, first by Director Mantooth and a second by Director Mahaffey. Do we have any discussion from the board? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you, Tina.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
We'll move on to item number 6, follow-up and administrative issues. A, consideration and possible action of items discussed in closed session if needed. Obviously not applicable with no closed session today. B, announcements and consideration of future agenda items. Do we have any? Seeing none, then we'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
We have a first and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. We'll see you at the workshop.
Who seconded?